I've gone through so many iterations lately, and you guys know that I'm adding the conical from Spike. You know, I'm adding the Pico Brew, and I'm just constantly playing with gear that helps me get to the point where I can make batches better, quicker, and experiment more, because that's kind of where I'm at. Whereas Mike is an experienced brewer that knows exactly where he's going. So welcome back to RGR Craft. This is Mike Monhall. I'm Ryan Tracy. We're two guys that make beer, and that's about the end of it. But how you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good. I got a beer in my hand, so I mean I can't complain.
Right? You showed that a couple of weeks ago when we put that on, and that's kind of where I wanted to start, because a lot of folks, and Citra's probably, for those of you that are home brewers or into craft beer, you've seen Citra pretty much everywhere. It is ubiquitous at this point, but it's always in either pale ales or IPAs. You don't see it used much else in anything new and different. But I like the fact that you put it in what looks like an amber to me. Is that what you meant for that recipe to come out as?
No. You know, it's a little bit of the color of this room, and it's a little bit, there is a little bit of amber tint in there.
Okay.
I wish I had the grain bill in front of me, Ryan, so I could tell you probably where that color came from. But it really is nice. It's a very golden color, but just with that amber tint to it.
Looks great to me.
Yeah, it's really nice.
So tell me what made you go Citra.
Honestly, it was Upslope Citra Pale Ale.
It's a classic.
You know, it is. I just liked the beer. It was pretty sessionable, and I wanted to play around with the hop, so I just designed a recipe around that, and here we are.
I like it. Honestly, Upslope does a lot of basic beer really, really well. They have a series that they barrel age or they do some strange things with, and I like those a lot as well. But their Citra and their brown ale are incredible, folks. If you don't live in Colorado like we do, if you can get Upslope, go check out the Citra Pale Ale, because that's my go-to for people that like Budweiser. Like, if they want to try craft beer, that's what I try to give them.
So Citra's Pale, or Upslope Citra Pale. So that would be a pretty far stretch from the Bud Light and the Miller Lite drinkers, but that's okay, right? I mean, sometimes that's the best way to get somebody introduced into craft beer, is to just throw them into the deep end of the pool with rocks in their pocket.
And I've had good success with it. That beer goes over really well with Miller Lite drinkers in particular.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, it's just it's just an easy drinking beer. But I just like the Citra. I like the, the flavor of the aroma. Obviously, it's citrusy, more than just a little. It's pretty heavy on the citrus, but all that flavor and aroma comes right from the hops, right? It's not like you're adding orange peel or anything. But yeah, anyway, I chose to play with Citra just because I liked Upslope Citra Pale. And honestly, I think rather than making a double IPA with that hop next time, I may just make a pale. Right, I'd like something a little bit more balanced, especially in the summer when it's hot, like right now. Yeah, I think just a lighter, more easy drinking pale ale, like a lawnmower beer with Citra, will be a fun thing to try.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and it's funny because you're doing the exact opposite of what I'm doing. Because I did a couple pails here back in the spring when we first got quarantined, because I wanted something I could drink all the time. Now I'm going back to I'm rekindling my Mjolnir double IPA with Kveik, so that I'm going the opposite direction. My next brew next weekend is actually coming up with Brew 1 and Strata underneath it. So I'm kind of taking hops from here and trying to go up to infinity is my goal.
Right. So you are much more experimental than I am with ingredients. You do the beer, by the way. So how are you educating yourself on these, unusual yeasts and strains of hops that aren't very well known? Where are you getting your information, and how are you designing recipes around these things?
Well, it's funny because I go a lot of different places. First and foremost, if you're serious about getting into homebrew, or you're a homebrewer already, you can't really do worse than getting Zymergy. Go to the AHA and just get subscribed. They have a lot of great ideas that come out in that magazine every year. Beer and Brewing's another one. The print stuff is great. For me, obviously you guys know that I like talking and video, so I watch a lot of YouTube channels and I listen to a lot of podcasts. Brewlosophy is a great one. Experimental Brewing is another great one. You guys have heard these names before. A lot of folks that are active in the AHA, that are active in the homebrew community, are doing these podcasts, and a lot of absolutely great ideas. But the number one thing for me, as a guy who comes from high school in the West Coast, not very far from Yakima, I listen to Yakima Valley and what's coming out of there. Specifically, a couple of Yakima Chief and Yakima Valley hops are two companies that I mail order all my hops from now. I don't buy them retail because I think you get them a little fresher and you get more experimental options there. And I'm constantly trying to play with something until I find the perfect combination. And then, I'll make it and we'll all drink it forever.
Yeah. And I stick with the things that I know well, and the hops and the yeast strains that work for me, right? I'm very less experimental. Not that I don't mind experimenting. I like experimenting, but just you and I have different philosophies on, I want to make sure that I have 5 gallons of beer that I'm really going to like to drink.
Right.
And then I want to share, right? Or I'll design, I will incrementally change things that work for me, as opposed to going all in on all new stuff.
Right. And I'm trying to get more like you, like this triple recipe that I just finished this glass. This is my 4th iteration and I'm not happy with it. I tried something new in this one, and I'm going to backtrack from that. I'm going to go back to the last recipe and go from there. And that's something that you've been an influence on that in the way that I approach things, but it's also a way that a lot of people are, because when you get the flavor that you want from ingredients that you trust, why change it?
Sure. Right. Yep. As soon as you land on something that you really like, stick with it. Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I mean, I'm kind of doing something similar to you. I have my triple recipe. I was progressing and iterating on that and making it a little bit better. And I think I got to the point where I actually didn't like it as much as the first few batches. Right. So I actually kind of unrolled all that stuff that I had been doing the last few years and started with a brand new recipe that I just picked up off the web of somebody that I trust. And I'm starting with that just to see if I can start iterating and get back to where, to a beer that I like, right? Not that I don't like the triple that I make now. It's just not the triple that I want it to be.
Right. And it's constantly a progress, right? About where it is versus where you want it to be.
Yeah.
And I have to say that as I compare it to some of the older classic Belgian triples that I've drank, I'm doing my best not to drift back to the classics, because that's what I keep comparing mine to.
Right.
It was fun to be experimental, but I need to get more of especially the base, the malt aspect of it. Hops are one thing. I don't mind malty beers. I don't even mind when people over hop beers that should be malty. It doesn't bother me, but I want that malt character to be correct in terms of some of the classics that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. What are you experimenting with right now?
What I've done, and for those of you that have the ability to control your mash temperatures, I'm all over the place. The more pro brewers that I talk to and the more friends that I have in the industry that give me little tips, I'm too conservative in how I mash. And I do 4 steps is my average if it's either an IPA or any Belgian beer. And I think I'm trying to cover too many gamuts. I'm too scared to never go over 146 in my mash temperatures. And that's what I'm hearing. If you really want it to be the way that you're looking for, don't break 146 until you ramp up to mash out. And I'm not even going to do a mash out in this next one. That's how experimental I am.
Well, that's very, very interesting. Well, and then again, and so I'm more conservative in my processes. The thing that I can't do very well right now is control my fermentation temperature, which that's a flaw, right? So that's not really a beginning brewing thing, right? So if you're making your first few batches of beer, you don't have to worry about your fermentation temperature. But I think to get close to the beer that you're trying to make, fermentation temperature is pretty critical. And that's it's definitely not experimental, except for perhaps equipment and some upgrades I need to do to make that happen for me.
And it's been a process for me too. That's been the number one thing that I've added lately is the chamber, which is an old refrigerator, just to control that. And that's really made a difference in the last probably 8 or 10 batches that I've made. But for folks that are new to this, and we're not trying to specifically be all newbies all the time, but we want to make sure that for those of you that want to get into this hobby, that we help you along. One thing that you can do that always helps is using the Kveik strains of yeast. They're from Norway, they're farmhouse, and they have a temperature range anywhere from the low 60s all the way up into the 90s. So temperature control is not an issue for them. They'll adjust to whatever temperature your house sits at, and they can ferment. Whether it be fast or slow may be different, but they will still do their job. So
you've been using those strains.
I have.
Do you find that there are different characteristics that are produced if you ferment at a higher temperature as opposed to a lower temperature with those strains?
I do not.
They're pretty consistent.
They're absolutely consistent. The difference is when I ferment, say I use Voss quite a bit. I've experimented with some of the others, but I like Voss the best. If I ferment that at a starting temperature of 93 or above, I'm done in 3 days. Terminal gravity at 1006 or lower. If I start it in the 60s, it takes a week, maybe longer.
Sure.
So for temperature with Kveik is how fast it gets done. It's the amount of pitch that controls the esters that are created and the flavors that it throws. So my gut is to always build up a starter, give it plenty of yeast, right? Kveik's the total opposite. You want to take half of a dose, maybe throw 2 or 3 teaspoons in a 5-gallon batch. And then you'll get these nice aromatic mandarin and orange overtones, particularly on the aroma, but also in the flavor.
Interesting, probably because the yeast is having to work harder to get its job done. That's fascinating. That goes against everything that I've ever learned about yeast.
It's completely opposite of everything we've ever learned about any other strains.
Right.
In fact, I have family in Norway through a couple of connections. My cousin's actually in the process of getting me some farmhouse strain from the area of Oslo where my family's from, because they distill with it. They use the same yeast in their beer that they use in their whiskey. And I think that that's really incredible. And it tells you just how versatile these strains really are.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
It's going to be interesting. We'll see if it tastes decent. Yeah, the transatlantic flight might be troublesome, but we're going to find out.
Sure.
So beyond experimentation, what are you happy with? Like when you look at trends in the brewing community, with everybody going to more canning, with not having tap rooms open, or some states have opened up and now they're closing back down. As we look at that, what does that do for you in terms of being able to get beers that you like, that you might not necessarily brew yourself? And where do you think that you want to go because of it?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I mean, we're still in the middle of this, it's kind of hard to see. Like the beers that I want to drink are still available at the breweries that make them. The ingredients that I want to use in my beers are still available. The biggest impact for me personally is that I don't get to go to the breweries that I normally go to, the local breweries. But long term, I don't know what it's going to look like, Ryan. I think a lot of these smaller breweries they're not going to be able to survive this. They're going to drop out, right? I think the ones that survive are the ones that can package their beers or fill growlers. Yeah, exactly. Packaged well, right? And actually have a distribution system. But those aren't, there aren't a whole lot of really super local craft breweries that can do that efficiently and effectively.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see not as much variety, and we're going to see a lot of these local breweries, the neighborhood literally just pull on up to a bar stool, and that's how you get served. That's how you learn about their beers, right? They don't distribute, they don't package. I just can't imagine them surviving unless they've just got a bank full of money where they can just ride this out for the next 12 months or whatever it's going to be.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And I would encourage all of you, wherever you are, in whatever state, if you like craft beer, almost everywhere, particularly in Colorado, beer is still available from the breweries as packaged beer. curbside pickup, that kind of thing. Everybody's got a different twist on it. I know Ruben's in Seattle is a great conveyor belt of a process line. Support the breweries that you like. If they have something that you want, go get it from them. You don't have to subject yourself to exposure or whatever. You can go to curbside and get whatever you want. Check out the breweries beforehand, obviously, just to make sure. But I think I agree with you, Mike. Anybody that can distribute their beer on still a personal basis like that is going to have the advantage over somebody that is unable to put it in a container.
Yeah, for sure. And, we saw at least a little bit of a trend before, coronavirus hit, where, the mobile cannery, where the cannery would go to the breweries, right? I would hope that we get to see more of that, right? And I would hope that mobile cannery stops at my house so that I can package some of my beer. I would brew more often.
There's a business plan.
There you go. That's right.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, there's enough home brewers in my neighborhood where we could make that work.
You have a neighborhood. I like that. There's more deer in my neighborhood than people. So
that's right.
That's the way that works. But I like the way that you're going, though, because that allows you not only to preserve what you've made, but also spread it around. And I think there's going to be a lot of good brewers that eventually are out of work, just like you said, because not everybody can survive. So I would encourage people wherever you are and whatever state you're in to support the folks that you think are good and that you want to see survive, because business is tough these days in this particular industry, but that does make for more home brewers. So we're glad that you're here. We will continue to give you more and more tips about how to progress through this process of making home brew, because it's legal, it's nice, and it can be everything that you want. So Mike, any parting thoughts, anything else that we should cover this week?
I don't think so. I think we need to go have another beer.
I'm sold. That's it, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll check you next time.
Cheers, friends.